faith last week. I focused a lot on Hebrews 11:1. I'm going to read that again. It's going to be on the skyline most of the service. Because I want it's my definition of faith that I've come to accept. This is what I think of when I think about faith. And so since we're talking about sticky faith, I want us to have faith up on the board for us to check out. And it says this: the fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. My youth are going to think this is funny. I want everybody to stomp your feet on the ground right now. And I want you to read that again. The fundamental fact of existence, okay? Fundamental fact of existence, this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's solid. And that's what we're talking about. I was thinking about what made my faith sticky. Like what led me to the place I'm at. And I distinctly remember a Sunday morning in August of 1981 in a small two-person dorm room in Hatcher Hall on the campus of LSU. It's an alleyway that separates Hatcher Hall from Tiger Stadium. Hargrove's smiling because we went to a ball game there, and I pointed at my window. I showed him the window of the room where I flunked out of college. Actually, it was across campus. But anyway, he saw that place. He saw my dorm where it was, Hatcher Hall. August of 1981, I woke up in that dorm room, and it was my first Sunday morning away from home. In that kind of way, I've been to youth camp and youth group and that kind of thing, but this was different. Before that, a little bit of context. The days leading up to that were really exciting. I had graduated from South Lafourche High School. I had got all these gifts and gift cards and things. My mom had stayed on me, and I got all the thank you notes sent back. There was this Cajun family, really good friends of ours, who went to our church. They threw a going away party for me. I suspect they really wanted me to marry their daughter so she didn't have to go to college. And they were now. I might have been reading that wrong, and that's kind of a cold thing to say out loud, but it was, I just kind of had this thing. She had a grandmother, an old Cajun lady, that said, man, if you don't have dirt under his hands, he's not worth marrying. He wanted a worker, and 19, you're kind of an old maid, and so I kind of think they threw this party wanting me to do this other thing. I don't know, I might be wrong with that. I probably shouldn't have said that out loud on the tape. But, had this party, and we loaded up all of my essential possessions into my first car. I had a 1980 Vet. Well, actually, it was a Chevette. And it actually looked like that. But anyway, it was my Vet as far as I was concerned. And that's where we loaded it up. We had it packed up to the gills. And we drove to Baton Rouge, and we showed up on campus. And we unloaded all the stuff out of that little car and out of my mom's Delta 88. We brought it up to my room in Hatcher Hall. And after we did that, we grabbed a bite to eat, and we went to the grocery store to pack my pantry, which was a shelf in my little bitty closet. We stocked up my 1.5 cubic foot dorm refrigerator, and we walked out to the curb, and I stood there on the curb, and my mom was crying, and my dad shook my hand really firmly, and then they left me standing under the live oak trees in front of Hatcher Hall alone. You see, this was the first time I walked back up to my room, and it was the first my room that I'd ever had that was not under my daddy's roof. And I sat down in that place, and it was me and 30,000 people that I did not know. And there I was, on that campus. My roommate was this guy from New Orleans. I cannot remember his name. He had a different religious background from me. He had a different culture from me. He listened to different music than me, and he listened to it on my stereo, which I didn't like at all. And I decided really quick that I didn't like this guy. I decided really quick. And you know what? I really wish I knew who he was, and I really wish I could go tell him I'm sorry that I felt that way about him, because I really didn't know who he was. I didn't know his story. I didn't know anything about him. But I made a judgment very quickly about him. I think he was done at LSU by the end of the first semester. Probably before football season was over, to be honest with you. But he was gone after the next semester, and I moved in with someone else. I didn't do much that first night they left me there. I mean, I did not know a soul there that I would call to go do something with at that place. Within the first week, I made the trek across campus to go to the Baptist Student Union. Now, that's not really an Animal House kind of story. I realize that. Not everybody went to the Baptist Student Union. But I went there because my brother had been involved there. He had met his wife there. I promised my mama I was going to go visit. I'd been in that place before. Our little youth group from First Baptist Church of La Rose, Louisiana, had done a couple of programs there. They had these crazy game things that we would do during the year. They did it for a fundraiser for their mission projects. We would show up with all these churches from all over the state, do these crazy games on the parade ground of the campus. And I'd been there for that. The director there, the minister there, was a guy named Frank Horton. And he did my brother's wedding. So I knew who he was. And so I walked across campus, and I walked in the front door of this building at the corner of Highland Road and Chimes. And I stepped inside, and there was Frank, this little bitty old man. And he looked at me, and his face exploded with this big grin. And he said, "Mike Young, I've been waiting for you to get here." And all of a sudden, I wasn't alone anymore. I mean, all of a sudden, I knew somebody on campus, right? All of a sudden, this was another place. I had my little room over there at Hatcher Hall, but now I had another spot. I had a spot that I was welcomed in, that I knew that somebody knew me and cared about me, and it was a big deal. I registered for classes that week. One day after classes started, I'd been to some Welcome Week programs and stuff during that first week. That's one of the things I always tell students when they go off to school. Those first 5 weeks, get out of your dorm room. Go do something. Go meet somebody. Yes, I want you to study, but don't use that as an excuse to stay in your dorm room locked up and not meet anybody. And I tell people, go do that. And I learned that myself as a college student. And I went to a couple of Welcome Week things, met some people. Well, this day I was between classes. I went back to my room. I was taking a nap, and somebody knocked on the door. And my roommate was there. He jumped up, opened the door, and I remembered the voice from Welcome Week. It was this guy named Tom. He was a minister at a church in Baton Rouge. And I really didn't want to talk to Tom. I really didn't want to talk to Tom in front of my roommate who had a different religious background than me and had a different culture from me. Because Tom was this little Baptist preacher guy. And Tom was there at my door, and he wanted to talk to me about going to church, and I really didn't want to do it. So I did the Ferris Bueller thing and pretended to be asleep. You know, I kind of wanted to, if I had a tape recording of snoring, I would have kind of started that. Because I was going to be asleep, and I did not want Tom to talk to me. And I heard Tom talk to my roommate, and he invited him to go to church and all these other kind of things that I didn't want him to talk to me about in front of him. And then Tom moved on to the next person. He closed the door. And I remained asleep for another 15 minutes or so because I didn't want the roommate to kind of, think I was faking it. And I stood up, and when I got up, the roommate said, "There was this dude that, a dude named Tom? He looked like a preacher or something. Like he invited me to church or, anything?" I was like, "No, I don't know. I don't know that guy." So then this Sunday I was telling you about came. And my alarm went off, and I turned it off really quickly. And I laid there in bed, and I had a decision to make that I'd never had to make before is myself. I had a decision to make. Am I going to get up and get dressed and go to church or not? First Sunday that I ever had to make that decision for me, right? Are you going to get up and go to church or not? Your choice. And I slipped out of bed, took a shower, got dressed very quietly, slipped out of the room, closed the door, and I went to Tom's church. Now, why did I go through all of this stuff to tell you this story? I mean, we all have a story to tell, and since I've got the mic and I'm up here, I'm telling my story, but we could all tell a similar story or some kind of story about all of it. In all candor, to be transparent up here, I get to play the role of the dad in 6 days from my story. See, I played this role 4 years ago when I dropped my daughter off in Baton Rouge. Very similar to what happened to me. So I've kind of got experience at this. I've done it before. But then ignorance was bliss, and now I kind of know what's coming. And, it's a big deal, right? The feelings that you feel, and many of you have felt this, there's excitement, there's sadness, there's happiness, there's being very, very proud, and that's just the parents, right? I mean, you've got the students going through this too. And so in 6 days, I'm going to drop my son off in Knoxville at the University of Tennessee. And that's the context. I'm going to go balls. I'm good with that. We try any better than you go to Alabama. I'm just saying. I've got to eat food at McChesney's tonight. I'm going to watch what I eat. That story and this series came to mind when I was preparing this, and that's why I told it. Now, this decision for me to go to church that Sunday was an individual decision. I was the one that had to get me up out of bed. I was the one that had to put my feet on the floor and make the steps and do it. I didn't have anybody going to church with me that morning. I got in my hot rod and I drove across Baton Rouge to Estrema Baptist Church, and I went to church that morning. Walked in the door by myself, did the whole thing. But in a real way, I wasn't alone in my bed that Sunday morning. In a very real way, there was this community of faith that had been praying for me the whole time I was a kid. In a very real way, there was the people that were at that welcome party were the same people that had gone to Bible school and taught me there, and the same people that had done stuff for me in church. And they had walked with me through high school and actually from kindergarten all the way through. And those people were really there with me too, because they were part of my family just as much as my family were, to be honest. And they were part of this thing. And so they were there with me that morning too, and I knew they were praying for me. They were lifting me up as I went through this particular rite of passage, and it was very empowering. It was a very cool thing to feel. And I didn't even know it at the time. I was just nervous and didn't know what I wanted to do. But those people were there with me. I'll also tell you my story with a little bit of hesitation, because a lot of times when we end up here on the stage and we tell a story like that, it's easy to misconstrue that story as, okay, that's the way to do it. So if we want sticky faith, preacher's up there talking about his sticky faith, that's his story, so I've got to have that story. And the danger is if you don't have that story, then some people say, well, I must have screwed up, I didn't do that. Or we think, I don't know if that, I can't really connect with that. And so there's a danger in telling a personal story like that. But I wanted to tell it anyway because it's my story. And each one of you have a story. My story is not the story, it's a story. But it's my story, and I was going to tell it. And all of you are sitting there with a similar story. You may have gone to college or not. You did something that you stepped out and did something on your own. Even you kids you stepped out of preschool and you went to elementary school and you did it. You walked in that door and you did it. Or you stepped out of elementary school and you went to middle school and you stepped in there with all of those. What's that 8th grader doing with a beard? I mean, dude, you all did that. You stepped into those situations and you've experienced that kind of thing, right? So we've all done it. And we've all got a story, and we've all walked in those ways, and that's what's happened for each one of us. But here's the deal. All of our stories have come together today here in this place, in King's Cross Church. Right here. All of us have a faith story. All of us have walked it. All of us has come through these things. And we've all walked in the doors about 9 o'clock about 8:30, whenever you got here. We walked in these doors in this place, and all of our stories are sitting here in this place. And there's people listening on the podcast that'll be listening on that. They have a faith story that brought them to that place, to this King's Cross thing, whether they listen to it on audio or they're here in person. It's all brought us to this place together. And this faith, this fundamental fact of existence that I've experienced, that many of us experience, sometimes it animated my actions, everything I did. And sometimes it was really lifeless. I mean, sometimes it was sustaining to me in difficult times, and sometimes it was absolutely invisible. Sometimes it haunted me when I was doing something that maybe I didn't want to do or whatever, and it was there in the background, and sometimes it was the only solid ground that kept me going in the middle of stuff that I was going through. In light of all those experiences, I've always come back to this Hebrews 11:1 thing. The fundamental fact of existence is that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. One of my favorite letters in the New Testament is actually the book of Philippians. It's a letter that Paul writes to a group of believers that he loves very much. They've helped and sustained him through a lot of difficult times. He's writing this letter to help them in a difficult time for them. They had his back and he had theirs. And at the time he was writing this, he was writing it from prison. He didn't really know if he was going to survive this particular imprisonment or not. But he was going to write this encouraging letter to these people that had walked with him, that had had his back. He's going to have their back in the middle of it. There were other followers of Jesus in the prison with him. And he talks about in this letter of how they've encouraged each other. And the message of Christ was getting out in the middle of this prison because they were walking through this thing together. And it's a really cool book. I had to go back. I didn't know which scripture I wanted to land on today. I read the whole book this week, and I went back and was looking at it, and I landed on one that we're going to read to in a second. But it's a really cool story, and it's a very, really contemporary story when you think about it. He tells of these other believers in prison walking with him. He tells about how this church had helped sustain him. And the fundamental fact of Paul's existence was that his trust in God, this faith, was the firm foundation that made all of Paul's life worth living. It was Paul's handle on what he couldn't see. He didn't know what was going to happen to him in his prison. He didn't know if he was going to get out of it. But this faith was the fundamental fact and the firm foundation that he was walking on and that his peeps were walking with him through. In the first part of chapter 3, there's a section where Paul lists all of his credentials. He talks about he has this Roman citizenship, and he has this great birth. He was very pious. He had all of his religious credentials, and he said he counts all of those as rubbish. Now that word doesn't really do the Greek justice there. They translate in a word that means human excrement. All of those credentials that he could rest on, he counted them as rubbish. The message says as dog dung. That's what's in the message on that verse. All of these things that he could have confidence in, all of these things that would absolutely give him a license to walk confidently into whatever he was going to do, and maybe even avoid prison, all of those things he counted as rubbish. It's a strong rejection of something that had earlier been his very foundation. But you see, that wasn't his foundation anymore. That was his foundation. This verse that we're looking at, that's his foundation. Ultimately, what sustained Paul wasn't his credentials. It was his faith. One of my favorite writers is Anne Lamott, and my wife reminded me of this quote from Anne Lamott this week. She said that the opposite of faith isn't doubt. The opposite of faith is certainty. See, Paul was certain in all of these credentials. And all of these credentials would get him through a lot of doors where he was walking. But you see, that was not faith. And he counted all of that as rubbish. And he said, this is what's going to sustain me. We're going to look at Philippians chapter 3, verse 17 through 21. It's going to be on the Sky Bible. Right after he talked about rubbish, he writes this. Verse 17, stick with me, friends. Keep track of those you see running this same course, heading for the same goal. There are many out there taking other paths, choosing other goals, and trying to get you to go along with them. I've warned you of them many times. Sadly, I'm having to do it again. All they want is easy street. They hate Christ's cross. But easy street is a dead-end street. Those who live there make their bellies their gods and belches their praise. All they can think of is their appetite. But life, there's far more to this life for us. We're citizens of high heaven. We're waiting on the arrival of the Savior, the Master, Jesus Christ, who will transform our earthly bodies into glorious bodies like His own. And will make us beautiful and whole with the same powerful skill by which He is putting everything as it should be under and around Him. You see, there are many paths, there are many stories that we can choose to go on, that we can aspire to. And I'm not even saying they're all bad, to be honest with you. There's a lot of ways that we can go. And the powerful images out of this past verse, when we look at verse 18 and 19, he says there are many other goals that we can go along with, many taking other paths. They're trying to get us to go along with them. Easy street. Those who make their bellies their God. Belches as their praise. All they can think about is their appetite. But we were created for more than just to satisfy our appetites. Our appetites are so easily manipulated. I got frustrated watching movies this week. We were sitting around the house, kind of hanging out. Really didn't go anywhere this weekend. We were watching, I don't remember what all we watched. We watched Pirates of the Caribbean 2. We watched some other things. And all these ads were advertising junk food as fun. Like, you can't advertise it as anything else, right? I mean, Cheetos are a lot of things. They're fun, but they're not really food, because they can't really say food, they say it's fun. And we advertise, our appetites are manipulated so easily. And a lot of times we make our bellies our God in all sorts of things. We want to satisfy those appetites, and we just go wandering off down those paths. And the fact of it is, all of those things, they may be good or bad or whatever, are different, but the fact of it is, they're not the fundamental fact of existence. They're not a solid foundation to really build our lives on. And when we step out of our Father's roof and we step out on our own in these things, and we're making our decisions about faith and about the path that we're going to go on, there's a lot of other options out there. And we're so easily manipulated sometimes. So that's why we're gathered here. I mean, that's why we do this church thing together. You see, all of us come to this place, all of us bring our stories to this place today, at this time, and in this location. And you see, here's the thing about Sticky Faith. It's not enough for our stories to merely intersect in this place. This is a place where our stories merge. This isn't an intersection among all of our busy lives where we have all of these things that are coming into play all the time. Our lives are so busy. And this isn't just another date on the calendar, just another intersection with other humans, and we move on to something else. What we are doing here, and the significant thing here, and the thing that creates the sticky faith that we're talking about, that nurtures it, is not an intersection, it's a merging. It's a merging of our stories from wherever we're coming from, for whatever it is that brought us to this place, whatever it is, we come together in this place and we merge under this faith, this trust in Jesus. That's what we're doing. That's why we come here. As a community of faith, this is a place where our stories merge on this fundamental fact of existence, on this trust in God, this faith is the firm foundation under all of our stories. It's what makes our stories worth living. This. We're talking about Sticky today because we want King's Cross to be a place that nurtures that kind of faith. That's our vision. That's our goal. We want to be a place that allows people from all different walks of life, from all different stories, to merge together under this faith in God, and for us to walk together in that so that we don't have to do it by ourselves. There's not a 1, 2, 3 steps to sticky faith. And if I told you there was, I would encourage you to walk out. All right? This isn't some commercial or something. This is us trying to figure out how we're going to follow Jesus together. That's what we're trying to do. Kara Powell, who wrote the book Sticky Faith that got my mind going in all these directions, says that there are 3 shifts that occur in a church, in churches that become communities that nurture sticky faith. 3 shifts. One of them is a shift from behavior-based gospel to a grace-based gospel. What we mean by that, I'll give you an example. A behavior-based gospel says that we need to be pure, right? We need to not sin. We need to do these kind of things. And that's cool. I'll give an example. True Love Waits. We believe and teach that sex is always better within the context of a marriage. That's what we believe. That's what we teach. That's what we want. That's what we desire, because we know that that's what God intended. And so we'll teach that. But here's what happens, and statistics show this, and the ones that talked about dropping out, we talked last week about 50% of students who grow up in a youth group that are part of a church. Not talking about students outside church that go off to college. I'm talking about students that grow up in a church. 50% of them drop out of church and out of faith when they go to college. Half. And what the survey said was a lot of these students found out that when they screwed up, because a lot of times they will, it could be all sorts of things. It might be sex, it might be drugs, it might be alcohol, it might be flunking out of college like I did, it might be a lot of things. And what they find is this behavior-based gospel says, I've screwed up. They're not going to accept me back. I've heard them preach about this, and preach about this, and they're not going to accept me back. And faith becomes like this jacket that they can take off. They pull it off and it kind of gets kicked under the dorm room bed, and they don't have to bring it with them anymore. Because I've kind of screwed that up, and I'm going to just kind of take that off, and I'm going to go do my thing, right? But the gospel is not a behavior-based gospel. Stomp your feet on the ground. This gospel is this. That God loves us, period. It's not something we got to be good enough to grab. It's the hard, solid ground, no matter where our story takes us. The hard, solid ground that we're walking on, whether we know it or not. The fundamental fact of existence is that God meets us exactly where we are, and when He meets us there, it's with absolute love and absolute grace. And so when we screw up, God was there anyway. And when we teach that God loves us in the middle of those screw-ups, no, we don't want to screw up. I really don't want anybody to go through what I went through in college. Flunking out is not... it's better ways for me to get kids to get a good story to preach about than flunking out of college, right? I mean, there's a lot of other stories I could have told, but that's the story I told. I screwed up. And the gospel of Jesus found me right there and loved me, period, right there in the middle of that. I didn't have to be good enough again to come back. The gospel said that I've been here the whole time, and I love you. That's the gospel. We need to shift from a mere behavior-based gospel to the actual gospel. That Jesus loves us, period. We need to shift from a 2-table church to a welcoming young people around one family table church. And what this means is this. A lot of times what we do is we ship the kids off to the kids' zone, students off to the crosswalk, and then we do our thing. And a lot of times there's not a good intersection between students and the rest of the church. Right? Those are great programs. When we got programs, there's times when we need to have an adult class for adults. And kids probably don't want to sit in on that class. They kind of want to do their thing, right? They're going to have their class for it. And so I'm not saying we don't do these things, but we want to create opportunities that intersect, that merge, actually, us adults with our students in different ways. There's lots of examples of how this could happen. There's the adults that don't necessarily work in the crosswalk, but they were out there getting muddy last week, and they're getting to hang out with some kids that they didn't know. There's a mission trip that we've had where we have students and adults standing side by side walking in there. Every week, once a month, the youth are going to be going out on mission projects, and we're recruiting adults to walk with us and go with us to these mission projects so they can go out with them and serve with them. We have teachers. We're needing teachers in the Kids Zone where we get people that will walk alongside these kids and walk alongside them and be like Miss Betty Fair was for me. I mentioned her last week. She's the lady that gave me those markers that I still vividly remember. I remember what they looked like, how the cap felt, and what color they drew, and how they smelled. And I remember that because there was a lady named Miss Betty Fair that walked with me through the Kids Zone, we didn't call it that, of First Baptist Church of La Rose. And she walked with me, and her life merged with my life while I was there, and it was a foundational thing. When I heard Kara Powell speak about this, she threw out to everybody, how many adults, how many leaders to students do you have? And there were all sorts of different ratios. You had 1 to 10, 1 to 8, 1 to 15, all sorts of different things. And she said, here's what we're trying to do in my church. I want to have 5 adults for every student. And we all went, yeah, real world lady, right? But here's what she wanted. She wanted every student in their church to have 5 adults that knew their name, that was praying for them, that knew the sport they were playing or the instrument they played in band, or they knew they had a test going on that week and they were praying for that test. And when they walked in the door over a sticky bun or over coffee or over juice, they could see that student and not do anything creepy or weird, just say, how'd your test go? How was the jamboree this weekend? Are y'all ready for the halftime program? How was that test? What's going on with you? And 5 adults for every student. Think about how that would transport. It didn't take me long to list about 30 adults that had impacted my life as I walked through my story. I want us to be a church that nurtures that. And I want to challenge us to be a church that has 5 adults that know. Every student in here would have 5 adults that knows their name and knows how to pray for them. That's a challenge. And I'm throwing it out for us. And the last thing was shift from dry cleaner parenting to ministry partnerships. What she meant by that is, and we've all done it, we drop our kids off at school for them to get taught. We go pick them up and expect them to be taught. We drop them off at church. I want you to give them the Jesus thing, and we're going to come back and pick them up. Like the dry cleaners, my clothes are dirty. I'm going to drive through the drive-up window. I'm going to drop them off, and when I come back, they're going to be ready. But that's not what we do here. And this isn't a charge against parents. This isn't me fussing at parents, because I am one, and I know how hard it is. I also know that I can't do it by myself. And so I know that there was a man in this church that said, when my son got his car and said, can I have his phone number so that I can call him, or he could call me if he gets in trouble if he needs to. And I'm like, yes, there's a guy that can call my kid and can help him, is going to be praying for him, is going to be that. There's a guy that in this church that said he was going to do that. And that's an awesome thing. And that's a partnership with me. He wasn't getting out in front of me, but he's walking with me as I try to parent my kid. We want to be a church that walks alongside parents. I've got a Facebook page I want you to like. It's called Crosswalk Parents. Look for it on the website. There's not many likes there yet, but I want it to be a start of conversations with us as parents so that we can read some articles about this. We can have some conversations about this. We can talk about what it's like to parent a kid in this day, in this culture, and we can do it together. Because we're not going to be doing dry cleaner parenting. We're going to do partnerships. As a community of faith that have merged their stories together in this place, we're going to walk together with each other as we do this. That's what we're trying to do. So we want to shift from a behavior-based gospel to a grace-based gospel. We want to shift from a 2-table church to where there's an adult table and a kids table to all of us sitting around a family table together. 5 adults for every 1 student. And we want to shift from dry cleaner parenting to ministry partnerships so that we're all in this thing together and we're helping each other walk it together. Opportunities for our lives happen not only in this worship service. They happen in the Kids Zone when you're serving as a teacher. They happen in the crosswalk when you're serving as a facilitator of a group, or you just standing up there helping crowd control middle school boys. And my gosh, we need some crowd control for middle school boys. No, nothing personal with boys, but I'm just saying. There's a small group that's going to probably help us plan our retreat coming up in November. I think that's awesome. Opportunity for us to merge. Opportunity for us to come alongside each other and walk along with people as we do this. On Wednesday nights, we have access groups. We have life keys where we learn about our personalities and how we do things and what we think about things and how those come together. We have a thing about a study on marriage, on how to have maximum marriage and talk about marriage together with other couples. We have Bible studies going on. We have a centering prayer group going on Wednesdays. These are opportunities for all of our different lives. Instead of to intersect and move on to other things, it's where we can merge together and get to know each other better and become better able to walk in faith like this. I'm going to be forming a sticky faith team. I'm saying it out here publicly to hold myself accountable. We're going to get a team of folks that is going to help us evaluate what we've been doing and see if it's going in the direction that we're talking about here. I want to evaluate all of our programs and see, is it creating a sticky faith environment? And we're going to be trying to implement some things to do that. So you'll be hearing more about that as we go. Don't let this place be a mere intersection in your busy lives. Let it be a merging of all these stories. And we're merging into something. We're merging in that. We're recognizing that the fundamental fact of our existence, this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation that we get to live out our stories on. Let's pray. Dear God, I thank you for these people. I thank you for them being, walking with my family. I thank you for the opportunity to walk with these other families through this place. Give us all the courage to make this a merging rather than a mere intersection once a week. Give us the courage to be a little bit vulnerable and to step out into our weaknesses a little bit so that our story can merge with other people's stories. And when we do that, we get to see that you are faithful in every one of our stories. We ask that you give us a fresh awareness of your presence this very day. I pray these things in the name of Jesus.